My name is Elaine Marin. I'm 66 years old. People say I'm patient to a fault. The kind of woman who smooths wrinkles in other people's tempers. Maybe that's why what happened that afternoon caught me so off guard. The living room smelled faintly of lemon polish and the cookies I'd baked that morning outside. Savannah's heat pressed against the windows, heavy and slow. Ethan was sitting cross-legged on the rug, his game pieces scattered across the floor. "Grandma, you're cheating," he said, half laughing, half serious. I smiled away. "Grandmothers are supposed to," and leaned forward to move my token. Before I could touch the board, his small hand came up and struck my face. A sharp, open-handed slap. The sound echoed clean and flat, like a book slammed shut. For a second, I didn't move. My earring dropped to the rug. The sting bloomed across my cheek. Hot, immediate, unreal. Michael looked up from the couch, phone still in his hand. "He's only playing, Mom," he said, grinning as if it were funny. Heather perched beside him with her iced coffee, clapped her hands once. "Go on. Hit him back if you dare," she said. "Maybe then he'll learn." Ethan laughed, waiting for me to react. I didn't. The room tilted slightly, as if the air itself had shifted. My throat tightened, but no sound came out. I reached for my fallen earring, my hand trembling just enough to betray me. "It's okay," I heard myself say. My voice was thin but steady. "It's fine." Michael shrugged and turned back to his phone. Heather sipped her coffee, already scrolling. Ethan moved his pieces again, humming. The moment dissolved for them as quickly as it had formed, like a match snuffed out. I walked to the kitchen. The tiles felt cold beneath my bare feet. I ran the tap, pretending to rinse a cup, watching the water blur and shimmer as my reflection bent in the stainless steel sink. My cheeks still throbbed where his hand had landed. From the living room came laughter, light, careless. It filled the house the way humidity filled the air, thick and hard to breathe through. I pressed my palm against my face, feeling the heat there. And for the first time in a long while, I stayed quiet. Not because I was calm, but because I didn't know how to speak anymore. In that silence, the house suddenly felt too large for me. Too loud, and somehow too empty. I turned off the water and wiped the counter. Twice, though it was already clean. Then I took a deep breath and started stacking the dinner plates one by one, steadying my hands. The next morning, sunlight pulled across the kitchen, tiles thin and pale. I moved quietly, setting the coffee pot on the stove and folding yesterday's dish towel, smoothing its edges until they lay flat. The house was awake, but indifferent. I could hear the low murmur of Michael's voice from the living room, half listening to a conference call. Heather's laughter rose above his, the bright kind she used when talking to friends online. Ethan sat at the table, a cereal bowl in front of him, thumb-tapping on a tablet. He didn't look up when I passed behind him. I waited for a good morning, but none came. The quiet between us stretched, heavy and brittle. I began wiping the counter, though it was already spotless. Cleaning had always been my way of ordering chaos, of feeling useful. But now the simple rhythm of chores no longer felt like comfort. It felt like eraser. My hands moved automatically, rinse, dry, stack, while a small voice inside me whispered that I could disappear from this house, and it might take them days to notice. When I brought Ethan a clean napkin, he nodded once without lifting his eyes. "Thanks," he mumbled. The word was small, almost mechanical, but I caught it and held it close, the way you might hold a fragile thing that's already cracking. Michael passed through. On his way out, adjusting his tie phone
To his ear.
"Mom, could you pick up the dry cleaning later?" he asked, not waiting for my answer.
Heather followed.
Perfume trailing behind her like a boundary I wasn't meant to cross.
When
The door shut, the silence that remained wasn't peaceful. It was hollow. I stood there for a long while, surrounded by the faint hum of the refrigerator, the echo of voices fading down the driveway, and the lingering ache of a house that no longer felt like mine. Sometimes when the house falls quiet, memories come easier than sleep. That morning I sat at the kitchen table long after the coffee turned cold, staring at the faint ring it left on the wood. The sound of silence carried me backward to the years when everything was harder, but somehow
kinder.
Frank had been gone since I was 34. One minute he was fixing a loose beam at the school gym, the next he was
Gone.
a ladder and a heartbeat stopping together. I remember holding Michael that night, his small body shaking against mine as the phone slipped from my hand. He was only 9, too young to understand death, but old enough to sense that the world had cracked open. We managed somehow. I took a second job at the library on weekends and graded papers at night while Michael slept beside the heater, his school shoes drying from the rain. Every dollar I saved went into a jar labeled college, though most months it was nearly empty. I missed every church picnic, every movie, every small luxury, but I told myself it was worth it. Every sacrifice bought him a better future.
And for A.
While it seemed he grew into a bright, confident man, married Heather, started his own business. I smiled through every milestone, pretending not to notice how rarely he called, how visits turned into obligations.
I
thought love was enough to bridge the quiet distance between us.
Now sitting
in the same house I helped them buy, I realized love alone doesn't guarantee respect. Maybe it never did. Respect has to be taught, modeled, earned, and I had been too busy keeping the peace to demand it. The morning light had shifted. By the time I stood up, I washed the coffee cup, placed it gently on the rack, and looked out the window at the street below. Somewhere between the clatter of years and the weight of giving, I had raised a man who could laugh at his own mother's pain.
That
evening, after the house settled into its usual quiet, I found myself at the kitchen table with my laptop open, the soft hum of the refrigerator filling the gaps between my thoughts. I navigated to the bank account Frank had left me, the one I rarely checked beyond the necessary bills. My eyes fell on the automatic tuition transfers, 3 years worth, faithfully scheduled, each one drawing from his savings without a word to anyone. I traced the numbers with a finger still warm from the tea I'd poured, remembering the nights I went without new shoes or skipped lunch breaks just to make sure the payment
cleared.
I'd done it silently, quietly, because I believed in education, because I wanted Ethan to grow up with opportunities one never had. Each month I reminded myself it wasn't about gratitude. It was about giving him a foundation. But sitting there in the dim kitchen light, the same thought kept threading through my mind. What had all this given me in return? A slap, laughter, a sneer. My generosity, once an act of love, suddenly felt like a blind gift to arrogance, a quiet permission slip for cruelty.
The boy I
once held on my lap, fingers gripping my necklace as I whispered promises of safety, now thought it was a game to hit the woman who had given him everything. I leaned back, the chair creaking beneath me, and stared at the screen. The next tuition draft was scheduled for the first of the month, sitting there like a test I hadn't agreed to take. The Numbers blurred as my mind ran through years of sacrifice. Nights spent worrying over every penny, every detail, ensuring he had a path I couldn't walk for him.
And in that
Moment, I realized something I hadn't admitted to myself before. Giving without boundaries wasn't generosity.
it
Was enabling. Love without consequence was not kindness. It was weakness. I closed my eyes, pressed my palms to my face, and let the realization settle. The cost of silence had never been clearer. I had kept peace at the expense of my dignity. Tonight I decided that quiet would no longer be my only weapon. Something had to change, and it would start with the one thing they all took for granted: the money I'd faithfully provided. The house was dark, except for the warm glow of the kitchen light and the pale blue of my laptop screen. Outside, Savannah's humid night pressed against the windows. Cica's droning a slow, steady hum. I sat at the table, fingers poised above the keyboard, staring at the recurring tuition payment that had silently dictated my life for 3 years. $1,250 every month drawn from the account Frank had left me. Each payment a silent sacrifice, each one unnoticed, unappreciated, and now fueling their disrespect. Frank's voice came back to me, soft and steady, the way it used to be when he gave advice that sank slowly into my bones. Elaine, you teach people how to treat you. Don't let them forget
it.
I closed my eyes, remembering the firmness of his hands on mine when he said it. The words wrapped around my chest like a steady pulse, and for the first time in days, my mind felt clear. I moved the cursor to the cancel recurring payment button. My finger hovered for a breath longer than necessary, and I could almost hear Ethan's laughter from earlier that afternoon, light and careless, mingling with Michael's smirk and Heather's mocking clap. The memory stung, but it no longer weighed me down. It sharpened
Me. Click.
The payment was gone. A quiet calm washed over me, stronger than any anger I had felt. I didn't feel triumphant or vindictive. I felt unburdened. The decision wasn't a punishment. It was a reclaiming, a declaration that my generosity wasn't a blank check for cruelty or apathy. I sat back in my chair and let my hands rest on the table, warm and steady now, no longer trembling with frustration or silent fury. I imagined the envelope that would eventually arrive at the school, the small white rectangle that would force them to confront the consequences of ignoring me. But even then, I didn't feel like a person laying traps. I felt like a woman drawing a line, simple and firm. For the first time in years, I stood and walked to the window, pressing my palms against the cool glass. The humid night air pressed in, and the distant street lights cast long shadows over the empty street.
I
breathed in slowly, letting the calm settle in my chest. Freedom wasn't loud or flashy. It didn't need fireworks or screaming. Tonight, freedom was one quiet no, and for the first time I knew it was enough. The days that followed passed in a deceptive quiet. Heather spent hours in the living room, phone in hand, sharing every detail of Ethan's perfect morning routine with her followers. Michael moved through the house like a man on autopilot, barking reminders to pick up groceries or straighten the garage. Their voices blended into a constant hum I had learned to tune out. Ethan repeated phrases he had picked up from his parents, some sharp, some careless. Mommy says Grandma can't buy her own house because she's poor, he announced one morning innocently as he stacked his blocks. I felt the sting of the words, but I said nothing, smiling faintly as I picked up the fallen block. I spent my hours in the sunroom, watering the potted plants Frank had once tended, trimming the leaves with steady hands. Each droplet that soaked the soil felt like a small act of control or rhythm that grounded me while the storm brewed quietly around me. No one noticed the subtle change, the way my gaze lingered longer on details they had ignored for years, the crooked frame on the wall, the little scuff on the hardwood where Ethan had tripped last week. I waited, patiently, knowing the envelope from the school would arrive soon enough.
The
House felt alive but unaware of the
shift.
The calm was almost sacred.
A
Pause before everything moved again.
I
Tended my plants, trimmed the leaves, and let the air settle around me. Patience had a weight to it now. A quiet power that I alone could feel, waiting for the inevitable moment when they would finally have to notice.
The
Morning sunlight fell across the kitchen.
floor.
Dust motes drifting lazily through the narrow beams. I was folding laundry, keeping to the rhythm I had followed for decades, when Heather's voice rose above the quiet like a bell. "Oh, it's here," she chirped, scanning the pile of mail with manicured fingers. The school sent the packet for Ethan's tuition. She tore it open immediately, shuffling the papers as she spoke in her sing-song
Voice.
"Let's see. Oh, look at this outfit. He's going to look so sharp for fourth grade." Michael peeked up from his phone, running a hand through his hair. "Wait, what's in that envelope?" he asked, squinting at the sheet of paper she
Waved.
Heather's eyes widened as she scanned the page.
What?
"What do you mean, tuition unpaid?" she whispered at first, voice trembling, then louder. "Why wasn't this paid?"
I set the
Laundry aside and walked toward the table, palms resting on the smooth wood. Michael's glance flicked toward me, expectant, accusatory. "Mom, did you forget to send it again?" he asked, his voice low but
sharp.
I inhaled slowly, feeling the cool weight of the moment settle over
Me.
the hum of the refrigerator, the distant chirp of birds outside. Even Ethan's small shuffle of feet seemed amplified. I met Michael's eyes evenly. "No, Michael," I said, calm and deliberate. "I didn't forget. I canceled
It.
The silence hit the room like a wave. Heather's mouth fell open.
And for
Once, she seemed entirely unprepared. "You,"
what?
she stammered, her hands clutching the envelope. Her voice wavered between shock and disbelief. Michael's face drained of color, the casual arrogance he carried into every room gone in an instant. You can't let it," he repeated, disbelief cracking through his normally composed
Tone.
I nodded. "Yes. I paid when I was treated like family.
I
Will not continue to fund a household that treats me as if I were invisible." Heather stumbled back, eyes wide, a faint flush creeping across her cheeks. Ethan, who had been watching, shifted uncomfortably in his chair, sensing the sudden tension, but not fully understanding it. I felt a calm settle into me, a clarity that had nothing to do with anger. The room was still heavy with the weight of what had been said. For the first time in years, they couldn't laugh this off, scroll past it, or ignore it. They had to see me, hear me, and acknowledge that I would no longer be taken for granted. Ethan looked up at me, uncertainty in his
eyes.
I smiled faintly and ruffled his
Hair.
"You're fine, sweetheart. Adults sometimes have to learn lessons."
2.
The quiet stretched thick and unbroken, and in that moment I realized the shift had begun. Respect had finally arrived in the room, not demanded with words, but drawn quietly, firmly, by the person they had always underestimated. Heather slammed the countertop, the sound sharp and loud, echoing through the kitchen like a warning. Her face was flushed, eyes wide with disbelief and fury. Michael muttered under his breath, glancing between his wife and me, unsure how to regain control. I remained standing, palms resting lightly on the edge of the table, my voice calm, measured. I paid when I was treated like family. I said, I will not continue to fund a household that treats me as if I were invisible. Heather's hands trembled slightly as she waved the envelope in the air, but the words I had spoken hung heavier in the room than her anger. Michael swallowed hard, his usual assertiveness muted by the weight of truth. For the first time, they had to face the consequences of ignoring me, of laughing at the woman who had given them everything. Ethan, seated at the table, froze mid-bite of his cereal. His small hands gripped the edge of the bowl. The energy in the room shifted subtly, and I saw it in his eyes, a flicker of understanding, the first glimpse of humility. He had always watched the adults around him, absorbing their lessons unconsciously, but now the lesson was unmistakable. Authority did not belong to the loudest voice or the quickest laugh. Heather finally dropped the envelope onto the counter. Speechless, Michael ran a hand through his hair, voice quieter now. Mom, we can fix this. I'll take care of it, he said, though his words carried the weight of realization rather than negotiation. I shook my head gently. The lesson is not about money, Michael. It's about respect. And it is overdue. For a moment, the kitchen was still. Even the distant hum of the refrigerator seemed to pause. In that quiet, I felt the invisible lines of authority and dignity reestablish themselves, not through shouting or punishment, but through clarity, patience, and the simple insistence that being treated with respect is not optional. Ethan's eyes followed me as I moved toward the sink to rinse my cup. In that glance, I could see the first seeds of understanding taking root. The house stayed quiet for days, each room holding the tension of unspoken words. Heather moved carefully through the kitchen, her usual chatter muted. Michael lingered near the staircase, glancing at me with something that had never been there before, hesitation, maybe even humility. One afternoon he approached, voice low. Mom, he said, I've arranged for Ethan to start at the public school next week. It's not fancy, but it's better for him. I nodded, letting the words settle. Without comment. Later that evening, Ethan shyly approached, crumpled paper clutched in his small hands. He held it out, eyes down on the page. In shaky crayon lines were two figures holding hands beneath a bright sun across the top. In uneven letters he had written, Me and Grandma. I knelt beside him, brushing his hair back gently. It's beautiful, sweetheart, I whispered. He hesitated, then murmured, I'm sorry I hit you. The word struck me with a quiet weight, soft, but undeniable. I pulled him close, holding him tight, feeling the first real warmth in the house in weeks. Somewhere in the silence, I realized that respect and understanding could grow even after arrogance and pride had taken root. The small apology, innocent and sincere, carried the kind of lesson no envelope or payment could ever deliver. Dusk settled over the neighborhood, the humid air heavy but calm. I stepped onto the porch and reached for the switch Frank had wired years ago. The soft glow spread across the steps, warm and steady. This light isn't for waiting anymore, I whispered, fingers lingering on the railing. It's for peace. Inside, Ethan's laughter echoed through the house. Softer now, genuine and unforced. Michael and Heather moved Quietly, their voices gentler. The tension eased. I leaned against the railing, breathing in the evening air. For the first time in a long while, the house felt whole. House. The quiet strength I had claimed had reshaped the space around me, and in that light, I understood that dignity, once defended, could be as calming and enduring as any
Glow.